Um, so we're all interested in where things are in geography. So Liverpool, if you don't know where it is, it's in the sort of northwest of England on that map. I'm at the University of Liverpool. There's a number of universities in the city. And I work within something called the Geographic Data Science Lab. That's essentially been around for about 7 years. It started off as just me and a couple of PhD students sort of crammed in a cupboard. But we've actually grown quite rapidly, much like this conference, to around 10 faculty. We've got quite a number of postdocs, but the largest cohort within the Geographic Data Science Lab are actually PhD students. We've got nearly 30 PhD students ongoing at the moment this year, and they're all doing collaborative projects with industry. So it's quite an exciting, vibrant place to be. Broadly speaking, we're interested in two sorts of things. We're interested in cities and urban analytics, but we're also interested in something that we refer to as consumer data, and that's really going to be sort of towards the end of my talk. But before we get on to that, just a number of observations. Some things that are happening in the US, but there's also things that are happening within the UK. And then some of the activities that we've been involved in, which have looked to kind of address these issues. So one thing that I started off my career being interested in was open data. So data is available on a website. You can go and get it. You can go do your analysis, do what you want with it. You could make a product. You could sell that product. Except I'd always assumed that these data exist in sort of perpetuity and they'll be available tomorrow, next week, the following year, and so on. So anyway, this is a sort of screenshot from a website from the sort of the good old days. This happened. This then happened. Open data was no longer open. In fact, that data had been vanished data. In the UK, we have a kind of local taxation system for businesses. So if you're a business, you have to pay a local tax. And these are called rateable values. And it's based on how big the store is and the type of activities you've got within there. The Valuation Office Agency had a nice website. You could type an address in. You could see what the rateable value and what the sort of cost would be for that particular property. All the data was under something called an Open Government License, OGL, which is a UK open license. And it was great. I mean, you had to type in every address in the country to get all the data out, but if you were persistent, you could do that, and it was sort of happier times. I got really excited one day when I went to the website and found out you could actually get bulk data, and they even had an API, and this was great until I dug into the license, and the OGL had essentially been disappeared. The initial license essentially only allowed you, if you happen to be in that property, to actually go and look at the valuation of yours or similar properties. It was very, very constrained. They were explicit to say you couldn't do anything with the data and make aggregate statistics from it. And they've actually changed that a little bit now, so you can actually, there's a little bit of scope to use the data for other purposes, but there's no open government license. Now, you think, oh, well, you can still generate statistics for it and use it for research purposes. But when open data like this disappear, there are people who vested quite a lot of time into using assets like this to actually produce data products that they might be selling as part of their company's offerings. So I know a number of companies who actually had these data integrated into products, which when this license change happened, all of those products had to be polled. They could no longer sell them. And obviously that has impact on their own reputation. And also in terms of any sort of future efforts they're going to put into open data and developing kind of assets, future assets from those. Final observation before I talk a little bit about what we're doing in this space. 2017, we had a new budget announced. One of the things that was quite interesting in the new budget was the government wants to set up something called a Geospatial Commission. And the idea is that this will be an organization who would have a strategic oversight of lots of different data sets that within the public sector that the government own with a spatial focus. And the idea is that they can plan and integrate these data better. One of the things that was quite exciting in this was the idea of opening up this product called MasterMap, which is supplied by the Ordnance Survey. It's one of the sort of premier data sets we've got in the UK for things like sort of building outlines, roads, administrative geographies, addressing geographies, and so And traditionally, that's been closed. There are derivatives of that which are open, but the actual crown jewels, if you like, were closed. So they announced as part of this budget that there would be some investigations made to release these data either under an open government license, and then a spoiler alert, or an alternative mechanism, which you can guess which it's ended up being, an alternative mechanism, which is actually, some aspects are going to be open, but there's a lot of it isn't, and there's also some usage restrictions as well. So open data is not always open in perpetuity, and increasingly open data is not being released, certainly at the national extent. There's obviously some cities are particularly engaged in releasing some of their municipal data, but certainly nationally comprehensive data, it's slightly more problematic. Now, urban data is obviously not just about open data, and there's lots of other types of data that you can get for cities related to transactions or sort of consumer data, volunteer geographic information, so things like social media, and then there's a variety of sensors generating data, a lot of which we've seen today, be it your mobile phone that you're carrying around in your pockets, or other sort of devices from sort of Internet of Things, which might measure things like pollutants or footfall and so on. Now, some of these data may be open. A lot of them aren't, for either very good reasons, that there's confidentiality and sort of disclosure constraints, or they're commercially sensitive. Now, all of these data are actually very useful for research. And that's where the centre that I run at the University of Liverpool, along with another other universities within the UK, comes in, something called the ESRC Consumer Data Research Centre. And we set this up about 5 or 6 years ago to essentially provide the interface between data owners of urban data, more generally, and researchers. So researchers want to get data. They don't know who to ask. And the data owners may or may not want to share data. And if they do want to share data, they don't know how to share data. And they're particularly worried about things like reputation and the data being misused. So what they want to be assured is that there are very strong sort of governance and constraints, and that some of the pains of sharing data, such as creating the extracts and making those available, are actually made much more simple. So essentially, the CDRC operates in this space where we talk to data owners, convince them to give us their data. We have a variety of different data facilities, from secure labs where you have to go into a kind of locked room, sort of James Bond level of security, through to public portals with sort of detailing metadata, and then you can download and visualize things on sort of map-based interfaces. In order to make all of this work, we do lots of other things. We do product development, and I'll come on to that in a second. We're really interested in discoverability, so we say we have got this sort of CCAN map and a maps platform, so people can find out about what's available. And then we do lots of networking events. And this is the kind of crucial bit, really, of how you build, over a long period of time, trust with these data organizations that you can look after their data effectively, and you've got good governance and so on. And it's good for the people who interact with us. So these are 2 ex-students who've engaged with the CDRC, and they've both gone to work with the data partners who we introduced them to. So it's good for the companies who are interested in recruiting students. Lots of people do this. So we've had interactions or hold data from all of these organizations here, and I think I've probably missed some logos off. And we're interested in getting these data used. So in their raw format, record-level consumer data is often very messy, it's very voluminous, and there's a lot of constraints in terms of personal disclosure that we have to be cautious of if we're doing research within the public good. So what we try and do is we try and make as much of this data open as possible. And the way in which we do that is by turning it into what we call data products. The most detailed data, consumer data, tend to require a lot of skill to use, and you might be in a secure lab. Open data tend to be, you can look at it on a map and you can tell something about the place that you're interested in. Okay, and broadly speaking, we adopt something that we refer to as a sort of hybrid approach. And I won't go into a lot of detail for this, but what we're seeing more and more is having these integrated secure facilities where we can ingest data which is commercially sensitive and potentially disclosive alongside other data that may be open or have slightly different licenses. We can process this and turn it into some sort of model. It could be a regression model, like some of those models that you've seen earlier on today, or it could be a type of indicator, like a geodemographic, and actually take those data out of that environment and make those products open, which more people can access. We're finding this is a really helpful way in which we can actually get more people to use these consumer data. So we've implemented this on a number of what we call our data products. So I'll show you how you can go and have a little look at those in a minute. And this is just one example. So this is Liverpool, and what all these colored splodges on the map show are different geodemographic clusters which describe the use and engagement patterns with the internet. So in the UK, we have things like the index of multiple deprivation, about how deprived an area is. What that doesn't actually tell you anything about is what we refer to as sort of digital deprivation, which can have all sorts of impacts for accessing sort of government services, but also retailers might be really interested in this in terms of, who's likely to shop online. And we've mixed this together with other measures to look, for example, at how resilient retail centers are to people shopping on the internet, which could have sort of impacts in terms of vacancy rates and those types of things. And this uses a whole host of data, which we ingest into our secure data facilities, consumer data records, survey data. We apply a variety of supervised and unsupervised machine learning, and we produce the geodemographic at the end, which we then, because we've had this sort of relationship and conversation with the data providers, we're able to release publicly, and this is an example from our Maps interface. So as I said, one of the things that we're interested in is in terms of discoverability, so we do that in two ways. The first way, we do a lot of press releases from some of these data products and the insights that they generate, and we tend to release those through our Maps platform. To date, the last time I checked, it had about 150,000 hits, which probably in Carto terms is pretty small, maybe a sort of morning's activity. But in an academic project, this is actually quite a lot in terms of the UK, so it does get used. The other thing we've got is a CCAN platform. So we spend a lot of time generating metadata for all of these data assets and cataloging them. We have a list of all the data, both the secure data and the open data. The secure data, you actually go through an applications process as part of the governance procedures, and then you have to go into the secure lab. The open data, you can register and actually download this directly from the website. We spend a lot of time writing the metadata files, so you can see what's in the data, what the coverage is, and whether that's going to be useful to you. And this gets used, again, quite prevalently. So we've got around 10,000 registered users. There's been 126,000 downloads. And we also host a series of tutorials within the CCAN system as well, which actually use some of these data assets and teach you how to use R to do sort of basic mapping, for example. And they actually get a lot of views and a lot of downloads. So we do these two things really to sort of broaden our network and widen our user base. And principally, the CDRC is there as this kind of this middle ground between data organizations and people who want to use the data. The governance is very important within that context. We have to be able to only support projects which have a kind of public good interest, and that's important for us in terms of our funding from the research councils, but also it's important for the data providers who are giving us their data for these purposes. The reason being is if you're a commercial organization and you're giving data for research purposes, that's very different than saying this data is there and it's available and it's a free-for-all. Potentially your competitor organization can get it and say, what's my market share this month? So we're very careful about those types of things. But I think my general observation is that perhaps when I started my career, the big push was towards open data. The big push now is not towards closed data, and there's still some really good examples of open data. but it's a much more mixed data economy, and we need to have facilities and sort of protocols enabled to actually make the best of that. And in terms of the future of sort of social science research, which might want to use these data assets, these types of services are really important. I think the CDRC has kind of trailblazed this model, but it is a very UK-focused model, but it would be great to see it in, roll out into other countries as well, like the US. So anyway, that's basically all I wanted to say today. If you found anything of interest, you want to join our growing team and support some of our 30 PhD students, you can come and apply for our sort of professorship, assistant professorship in analytics, which you've still got about a week left to apply for. But if you, there's also, if there's any other sort of data organizations who are interested in data sharing with the academic sector, so I'm around sort of at the breaks and things to take questions. So thank you very much.